When would you greet Ambrosia? Screaming cheering for nearly a quarter of a century, Merv Griffin sat across from Hollywood's most powerful faces. From 1962 to 1986, he interviewed thousands of stars, legends, icons, cultural heroes. But what made Griffin different wasn't what happened on camera. It was what happened when the cameras stopped rolling. Unlike hosts who exchanged 8 polite minutes and moved on, Griffin lived with his guests for hours. He met them in production meetings. He watched how they treated assistants. He saw who they spoke down to and who they refused to look at. As one longtime producer later explained, Griffin saw everyone when they thought no one important was watching. According to staff accounts spanning multiple networks, internal production records, and documented first-hand testimony, patterns began to emerge. Not isolated slips, not awkward jokes from another era, but consistent behavior that shaped who was hired, who was excluded, and who never got a chance. Some stars demanded all-white crews. Others quietly enforced segregated casting for decades. And some built entire business empires on exclusion without ever acknowledging it publicly. What shocked Griffin most wasn't the fringe figures, it was the most beloved stars in America. The holiday voice that defined Christmas resistant to integration behind closed doors. The comedy pioneer who taught an entire generation how to embed discrimination into safe entertainment. And the Rat Pack leader whose power was so absolute, he never felt the need to hide anything at all. Griffin had one advantage no one else did. He saw the same stars across multiple decades, changing social climates and different networks. He watched who evolved and who refused to change, even as America did, and nowhere was that clearer than with the woman at number 1. Number 1, Bette Davis, the legend whose standards drew invisible lines. When Bette Davis walked onto the Merv Griffin show, audiences saw a titan, the unforgettable eyes, the steel-sharp voice, the woman who dominated films like All About Eve and Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. Her reputation was legendary. Uncompromising, demanding, brutally professional, she symbolized talent without apology. But behind the scenes, staff who worked with Davis throughout the 1960s and 1970s documented a pattern that went far beyond being difficult. Davis made specific requests about who could work near her. She insisted on experienced crew members. Language production staff understood his code for older white workers. When young black production assistants were assigned, Davis requested replacements, citing a need for people who understood her standards. Those standards did not change even when black professionals with decades of credentials were available. Multiple staff members documented Davis refusing to work with black makeup artists and hairstylists, specifically requesting white artists while claiming they knew what worked for her. The pattern was unmistakable. When discussing Hollywood's evolution, Davis frequently lamented declining standards, referring to the industry becoming too modern. Staff understood exactly what she meant. Her treatment of crew members followed the same line. With white staff, she was demanding but professional. With black staff, witnesses described her as curt, dismissive, and visibly irritated. And because she was Bette Davis, her behavior was protected. Complaints were brushed aside with a familiar excuse. That's just Be. Her legendary status became a shield. Studios ensured her talent remained the only narrative. Her demands for segregated working environments never threatened the image that made her valuable. While Davis used prestige to enforce invisible boundaries, the woman at number 2 would reveal how bitterness and fading power made those boundaries even harsher. Number 2. Joan Crawford, Hollywood royalty who aged into resentment. When Joan Crawford appeared on the Merv Griffin show, audiences didn't just see a movie star, they saw royalty. Perfect posture, controlled movements, a woman who carried herself as if the golden age of Hollywood still revolved around her. Her rags to riches story had once symbolized everything America loved about the studio system: discipline, reinvention, triumph through sheer will. Crawford represented elegance forged through struggle. But by the late 1960s and early 1970s, staff members who worked with her across multiple appearances began documenting a troubling shift. As television production modernized and crews became younger and more diverse, Crawford resisted. Not subtly, not occasionally, but consistently. She requested familiar staff, language understood by production teams as code for older white crew members from segregated Hollywood. When these requests couldn't be fulfilled, her displeasure was immediate and visible. More alarming were her demands for separate facilities when black performers or crew members were present. Different entrances, different preparation spaces, segregation framed as privacy. On paper, these requests sounded reasonable. In practice, the pattern was unmistakable. Crawford frequently lamented the industry losing its standards, using nostalgic language that insiders recognized as longing for an all-white Hollywood. This wasn't about craftsmanship, it was about control and about refusing to share space in a changing world. What made her behavior especially striking was how it intensified with age. Staff who worked with Crawford over multiple years noticed her growing less careful, less filtered as roles diminished and relevance faded. Resentment hardened into hostility. often directed at young black production assistants who embodied the future she felt excluded from. Multiple accounts describe Crawford openly questioning their presence on professional sets, treating them as symbols of an industry that had abandoned her era. And once again, her status protected her. Networks continued booking her because her name still carried weight. Viewers tuned in for the glamour, the nostalgia, the illusion that Hollywood royalty never truly aged. Behind the scenes, production teams quietly absorbed the cost, rearranging schedules, accommodating demands, maintaining segregated spaces, all to preserve an image that mattered more than accountability. Crawford's discrimination wasn't loud ideology. It was bitterness weaponized, wrapped in prestige, and while her behavior clung to the past, the man at number 3 would prove something even more unsettling, that some stars didn't hide their beliefs at all. Number 3. John Wayne, the cowboy who never walked it back. When John Wayne walked onto the MV Griffin show, viewers saw the ultimate American archetype, the cowboy, the soldier, the embodiment of rugged individualism. Across nearly 200 films, Wayne didn't just play heroes, he became one. His image fused so tightly with American identity that questioning him felt like questioning patriotism itself. But Wayne wasn't simply holding outdated views behind closed doors. He defended white supremacist beliefs, publicly and repeatedly. In 1971, Wayne gave an interview to Playboy magazine that removed all ambiguity. He explicitly stated his belief in white racial superiority. He defended historical atrocities against Native Americans, suggesting white Americans had natural rights to indigenous land. These were not misc, not implications, not different times. They were clear declarations printed in a national publication. What followed made Wayne's case uniquely disturbing. He never apologized. He never softened his stance. He never expressed regret. Production staff and guests who witnessed his talk. Show appearances after the interview documented Wayne actively defending his views. He framed white supremacist ideology as plain-spoken American honesty, not hate. When people reacted negatively, Wayne appeared genuinely confused. In his worldview, he wasn't extreme. Everyone else was overreacting. Staff from multiple shows noted that Wayne continued demanding predominantly white crews. Well after his statements became public, his preferences were accommodated without resistance, a privilege few others could command, and the consequences there were none. Wayne continued landing major film roles, continued appearing on television, continued being celebrated as a cultural icon. When he died in 1979, obituaries focused overwhelmingly on his career. His published white supremacist views were mentioned briefly, if at all, framed as controversial opinions, never as ideology that contradicted the heroic myths his films promoted. Wayne's case exposed a harsh truth. Power erased accountability. And while his ideology was explicit, The Woman at Number 4 showed how discrimination could be enforced quietly through contracts, casting, and business decisions. Number 4. Doris Day, America's sweetheart, who ran a segregated business. When Doris Day appeared on the MV Griffin show, America saw comfort, the blonde smile, the gentle voice, the woman whose romantic comedies defined wholesomeness itself. Doris Day didn't look like someone who wielded power, but by the late 1960s, she absolutely did. From 1968 to 1973, the Doris Day Show ran for 5 seasons. Unlike many performers of her era, Day wasn't just the star. She held significant producer control, including contractual approval over casting decisions, and she used it. Network diversity reports from the period show the series remained overwhelmingly white despite being set in San Francisco, one of the most diverse cities in the United States. This wasn't an oversight. Production memos document executives raising concerns about the lack of diversity. Day consistently resisted those suggestions, arguing that integrated casting conflicted with the traditional and wholesome image her audience expected. Inside production circles, that language was understood. Clearly, wholesome meant safe, and safe meant white. Her exclusion wasn't limited to on-screen roles. Employment records show her production company also maintained hiring patterns that systematically limited opportunities for black professionals behind the scenes. What made Doe's case especially significant was choice. She wasn't trapped by a studio system. She owned her company. She had authority to integrate, and she consciously chose not to. When Doris Day died in 2019, tributes celebrated her warmth, kindness, and enduring appeal. The documented patterns of exclusion embedded in her business practices were almost never mentioned. Her image remained untouched. While Day used sweetness to shield discrimination, the man at number 5 hid it behind nostalgia, music, and Christmas itself. Number 5. Bing Crosby, the Christmas voice that never changed. When Bing Crosby appeared on the MV Griffin show, audiences heard reassurance. the smooth baritone behind White Christmas, the voice of family gatherings, winter warmth, and tradition. Crosby sounded like America's favorite uncle. Behind the image, however, were attitudes that never evolved, even as the country did. Contemporary reporting from the late 1950s documented Crosby opposing integrated housing in California neighborhoods where he owned property. When asked about fair housing initiatives, he expressed concern that integration would lower property values. The arguments were economic. The outcome was racial segregation. What troubled staff most wasn't that Crosby held these views. It was that he never moved past them. Throughout the 1960s and 1970s, talk show staff documented Crosby, expressing nostalgia for simpler times while discussing industry changes. Insiders understood this as resistance to integration, not sentimentality. Multiple crew members noted clear differences in how Crosby interacted with staff. White crew members received warmth and familiarity. Black staff often encountered colder, more distant exchanges. Unlike peers who softened public stances as civil rights reshaped America, Crosby remained fixed, treating social progress as decline, and his brand made him untouchable. Criticizing Bing Crosby felt to many Americans like criticizing Christmas itself. His association with family tradition created perfect insulation from accountability. When Crosby died in 1977, obituaries celebrated his voice and holiday legacy. His opposition to integrated housing and decades-long resistance to change were largely absent from the record. His warmth, carefully curated, outlived the truth. While Crosby hid behind nostalgia, the entertainer at number 6 wrapped his behavior in patriotism so powerful that questioning it felt un-American. Number 6. Bob Hope, America's comedian, protected by the flag. When Bob Hope appeared on the Merv Griffin show, he wasn't just another guest. He was untouchable. For decades, Hope's USO tours had entertained American troops across multiple wars. His image fused comedy with patriotism so completely that criticizing him felt dangerously close to disrespecting the military itself. Behind that shield, staff documented patterns that never truly changed. Talk show production teams from the 1960s through the 1980s recorded Hope's continued use of offensive material long after cultural standards shifted. While many comedians of his generation adjusted their acts, Hope did not. He seemed convinced his status made evolution unnecessary. Accounts from USO tours describe clear differences in how treated staff. White crew members were met with familiarity and ease. Black support staff were treated with noticeable distance, professional but cold. These patterns repeated across years and tours, suggesting consistency rather than coincidence. Production staff from variety shows also documented Hope's resistance to integrated casts. When producers pushed for diversity, his team expressed preferences for maintaining traditional lineups, a phrase insiders understood clearly. When integration became unavoidable, Hope's interactions with black performers remained restrained, lacking the camaraderie he openly displayed with white entertainers. What protected him was not denial, but symbolism. Any criticism was deflected instantly. How could you attack a man who entertained the troops? That association created near total immunity. Other comedians faced backlash for outdated material. Hope never did. When he died in 2003, at age 100, obituaries focused almost entirely on his patriotic legacy. The documented patterns behind the scenes vanished beneath the weight of national. While Bob Hope hid behind the flag, the woman at number 7 used success itself as justification for exclusion. Number 7. Lucille Ball, the comedy queen who taught exclusion as business. When Lucille Ball appeared on the Merv Griffin show, audiences saw history, the red-haired genius behind I Love Lucy, a woman who broke barriers not just as a performer, but as one of the first female studio heads in television. She was proof that women could command power in Hollywood, and she did. Ball held contractual approval over casting, and she used it decisively. Throughout the 1950s, I Love Lucy featured remarkably limited black representation, despite being set in New York City. This wasn't passive acceptance of industry norms. It was active control. What made Ball's influence especially significant was her role in the 1970s as an elder stateswoman of television. Younger producers sought her guidance, eager to replicate her success. According to production records and first-hand accounts, Ball regularly advised others to prioritize broad appeal and safe casting. In industry language, this meant predominantly white casts. Her philosophy extended beyond one show. Diversity reports comparing productions from Desilu Productions to other studios showed consistently lower representation across multiple series. Writers and staff documented proposals for integrated storylines being rejected, not out of hostility, but out of perceived risk. Ball framed exclusion as smart business, and because her model worked financially, it carried enormous weight. An entire generation of producers learned that success and segregation were compatible, even preferable. Exclusion became not prejudice, but strategy. When Ball died in 1989, tributes rightly celebrated her brilliance and groundbreaking leadership. The long-term impact of her casting philosophy, however, was rarely examined. Her legacy was preserved. The consequences were not. And finally, at number 8, stood a man whose power was so absolute that he never needed excuses at all. Number 8. Frank Sinatra, the Rat Pack leader who never had to hide. When Frank Sinatra appeared on the MV Griffin show, audiences didn't just see a star, they saw the system itself. Sinatra was more than a singer, more than an actor, more than an icon. He was power, cultural, financial, and personal. Staff members from talk shows spanning the 1960s through the 1980s documented a consistent pattern in how Sinatra treated people behind the scenes. The division was clear. With white crew members, Sinatra could be warm, familiar, even generous. With black staff, accounts describe him as dismissive, impatient, and overtly demanding. Crew members reported Sinatra treating black workers as interchangeable service providers rather than skilled professionals. Respect was selective and predictably distributed. Production coordinators documented Sinatra making requests for familiar or experienced crew members. In practice, these requests functioned as quiet mechanisms of exclusion, and unlike less powerful guests, Sinatra's demands were never questioned. His connections ensured compliance. What disturbed staff most was how his behavior worsened with age. Those who worked with him across decades noted that earlier in his career, Sinatra exercised more restraint, but by the 1970s and 1980s, as his legendary status became unassailable, he filtered less. Multiple crew members documented Sinatra casually using slurs when frustrated, apparently confident that nothing be and no one could challenge him. And he was right. Snorts, despite decades of consistent accounts, Sinatra faced no meaningful consequences. His talent, his influence, and his myth rendered him immune. When he died in 1998, obituaries celebrated the voice, the swagger, the Rat Pack era. Backstage realities disappeared beneath reverence. Sinatra wasn't protected because no one knew. He was protected because everyone knew, and it didn't matter. These 8 guests appeared across 24 years from 1962 to 1986. What made their behavior significant wasn't any single incident, but the patterns repeated across decades documented by multiple staff members confirmed. Across different networks and production environments, this wasn't rumor. It was consistency, and MV Griffin saw something few others did. He watched which stars adapted as America changed and which fought every step forward. He understood how power insulated behavior, how networks accommodated demands, and how studios quietly buried complaints to protect valuable images. When similar patterns were observed by other hosts of the era, Carson, Sullivan, Griffin, denial became impossible. Cross-verification revealed a system designed not to correct behavior, but to contain it. These weren't just personal attitudes. They shaped hiring. They shaped casting. They shaped opportunity, or the lack of it, for generations of black artists. Every all-white crew demand, every segregated casting decision, every piece of advice, teaching exclusion as smart business. Together, they built Hollywood as it existed and explained why change came so slowly. The industry didn't just tolerate discrimination, it optimized around discrimination. It optimized around